Hello, this is Annie, Shaman of Avalon. Today, I want to talk to you about how we can benefit ourselves from the marriage of the sun and the moon in our own bodies and in our own relationships. If you've been listening along, you'll know that in recent videos, I've been explaining how this alchemical marriage is vital for growth and fertility, and that it is found in every aspect of nature, from the smallest atom to the most gigantic galaxy. We see the marriage of the sun and the moon in eclipses above, and in the dancing and weaving of energy lines across planet Earth below. We also find it in romantic myths about Mars and Venus, which are transcribed today as great love stories for our silver screens, like The Notebook, which was the subject of the last video on Mars and Venus. And so hopefully I've explained enough for you to know that alchemical workings of the marriage of the sun and the moon is vital for the successful continuance of the human race and for all life on Earth. Well, I don't want you to panic, please don't worry, it's never going to stop. But what can be a problem for us in the here and now is when we are deliberately left in ignorance about how it works, so that we're prevented from using what Mother Nature uses to make her empire blossom and bloom in our own lives. It is literally the life-giving Amrit or Soma of divine love that makes the world go round, while its opposite, if we should choose to follow that path, poisons the ground into a sort of arid wilderness or desert in which human beings or any real life finds it difficult to thrive. These teachings on the elixir of life, or mysteries as they have been referred to for thousands of years, have always been known about by the wise ones, by which I mean the mages and sages, or the grail keepers if you like, whose role it is to protect the holy grail of this knowledge and seed it into people's hearts and minds through the arts. The comings and goings on the world stage of different kings and princes with differing ideas of how to govern have meant that the grail keepers have had to conceal the mysteries of this elixir of life in nursery stories or songs or plays. Or sometimes you'll find it in artworks like those of William Blake and Da Vinci and the more enlightened artists, and also musicians like Bach and Handel and Mozart, such as also the works of Shakespeare, penned not by one brilliant but otherwise quite ordinary and unremarkable man from Stratford, but by a group of Rosicrucian playwrights who shrouded these mystery teachings in their plays for those who had the eyes to see. The underlying message is most obvious, to me anyway, in their fairy romp, A Midsummer Night's Dream. You may remember it. It's a comedy, but it has a much deeper meaning in which the sun, the fairy king Oberon, has fallen out with the moon, the fairy queen Titania. This rupture between them was turning the earth into a virtual wasteland. And so it takes the trickster antics of Puck, aka Mercury, to reunite them and for nature to thrive again on the earth. The bare bones of that plotline perfectly describes the 7-stepped alchemical processes that lead to the marriage of the sun and the moon and the birth of the child of the philosopher, otherwise known as the Philosopher's Stone. If you would like a more detailed breakdown of the metaphors of the Grail Keepers in A Midsummer Night's Dream and what they mean, it's all in chapter 4 of my book, The Sacred Sex Rites of Ishtar. In this video though, I'm going to give you a small taster of what else you would learn from that book, because I believe knowledge of this wisdom is so powerful that it can transform dystopian and desolate badlands into fertile rolling hills and plains. It is the land of promise, the green and pleasant land, the land of milk and honey that's written about in all the myths. So I'll give you a while to get comfortable before I begin, and please do hit the like button, and that will help me get this kind of information out to more people. I don't know if you're anything like me, but have you ever wondered what the female orgasm is actually for, apart from unmitigated pleasure? I always used to, until my understanding about life was changed through the practice of shamanism and by learning about these mysteries of the elixir of life. But it used to seem incredible to me that scientific and medical experts could find no good use for the female orgasm. Such a beautiful experience with its deep, profound and tingling waves building to a thundering climax of ecstatic bliss. It didn't appear to have any impact at all on the health of the body, other than the generation of a few pleasure hormones. It just didn't make sense to me. I mean, if you so much as clear your throat or sneeze, it has some sort of effect on your well-being, in that at least you get to shift some mucus. But not so this pounding rocket through the gates of the garden of earthly delights. It apparently has no raison d'etre at all, just ecstasy for the sake of ecstasy. Well, I'm going to tell you some more things and then you'll know why that's not true. Anyway, the scientists have said that the same cannot be said of the male orgasm that accompanies ejaculation, which is at least a vital factor in conception. But the good-for-nothing female orgasm apparently has held sway in the minds of those who should have known better for most of our lives. And it's not just about conception in their minds. They postulate that the male orgasm furthers man's evolution because of the pleasure it gives, which makes men want to have sex more often. Well, that's their excuse anyway. Of course, you could say the same for the female of the species if they all experienced orgasm, but unfortunately the trouble with that theory is they don't, and we don't know why. And it's the same in the animal kingdom. I mean, it's true that female orgasms are not so simple to fathom. For instance, all male animals orgasm, but not so all female animals. Gibbon ladies, for example, never get to wallow in such heavenly raptures, unfortunately for them. And so it makes you wonder why they bother have sex at all. What is the evolutionary imperative? But no, in humans, it turns out men are far more likely to experience orgasm than women, of whom 1 in 10 don't ever experience its delicious delights, sad to say. But added to that, the most common experience of orgasm with women is clitoral orgasm, which can be experienced in its full hallelujah chorus glory without contributing at all to the overpopulation of planet Earth. So the mystery deepens. What is the female orgasm for? Is it, as some scientists have been forced to conclude, an accidental byproduct of nature? Quite frankly, to my way of seeing, only those who are completely ignorant of the alchemical workings and intelligence of Mother Nature believe that she ever has any accidental byproducts. There's no such thing. But just because scientists cannot find what the female orgasm is for, it doesn't mean that it doesn't have a purpose. They just need to find another way to view it. And that's what I'm going to be telling you about in the next part of the video. So here's what I'm driving at. You may have noticed that when women talk about their orgasms, they seem to be describing a much more, say, holistic and rounded experience, almost verging on spiritual transfiguration, than that described by their male partners. Well, their male partners, that is, when they can bring themselves to talk about it. I mean, there's a lot to be said about not talking about it, and I'm sure the men are right, but anyway, we're going to need to talk about it here, because otherwise we won't be able to understand about this, what we need to understand to make our lives work. So in my view, modern Western scientists will never discover the purpose of the female orgasm so long as they continue to insist on their very limited set of tools, no pun intended, for investigating it. Their instruments of discovery only allow for outward probing exploration, when that probing would be better turned inwards, which would then automatically widen and deepen their parameters to go beyond just this one dimension in which we find ourselves living right now on planet Earth. As Albert Einstein discovered, all matter is governed by the energetic field. In other words, the health of the physical body is impacted by the auric fields around it, and these auric fields are invisible to the naked eyes of all but the sort of seers and shamans and mystics that used to guide the spiritual evolution of humanity. In ancient times, going back around 4,000 or 5,000 years into the Neolithic age, sacred shamanic sex rites would be performed in the mandirs and temples by high priestesses or sacred prostitutes, as they have come to be known. Actually, they had many different names all over the world. In Egypt, they were called hierodules, and in Rome, they were called Vestal Virgins, which makes sense when you know that being a virgin in those times had nothing to do with celibacy. In fact, quite the reverse. Back here at home in ancient Anglo-Saxon Britain, they were known as Cuans, and in their trust they held the sovereignty of the country or country. But whatever they were called, all these women were trained in the mysteries to use shamanic techniques, which included the female orgasm as much a function of the auric or energetic field as any physical process. In other words, the purpose of the orgasm was not considered to be just for the physical body, but for the whole mind, body, spirit continuum. And while this may not impact on evolution as understood by materialists and Darwinists, it has a vital application to the overall higher evolution of our true selves, the spiritual being currently on the human journey. The kings and pharaohs of Babylon and Egypt would spend the nights of their coronations with one of these high priestesses. So important was sacred sexuality regarded in those days to the sovereignty of the land. The ruler was expected in this way to undergo spiritual transfiguration through shamanic sex practices in order to be wise enough to rule over his domain. Now, if you want an example of what leadership is like without such wisdom, you need only look around you today at the people that are trying to lead us. But even today, we will say that the king marries the land. We know that saying even if we don't know what it means. It means that the king gains his right to rule, the sovereignty, from the land, from the spirits of the land, otherwise known as the Fae or fairies, hence Shakespeare's fairy romp. So how does this work? Well, the hierodule or Kuum would have been married to the spirit of the land in a shamanic way, and she would act as a conduit for the transmission of the sovereignty of the land to the new king through these sacred sex rites. I mean, obviously it wasn't just on the night of his coronation. You know, these would go on for some time because he needed training in all of this. So you may be wondering why you haven't heard all about this before. And how can it really be a thing when no one talks about it? Well, in recent times, we've witnessed several examples of how the media can push inconvenient truths down the memory hole. So imagine how much can be lost over 1,500 years of that practice. Most forms of shamanism and mysticism have been driven underground in the West until the early 1960s. The demonization, or shall we say cancelling, of shamanism was begun in the 4th century by the Roman Catholic Church, and then more latterly by the so-called Age of Enlightenment, which led to the supremacy of Western material science. This was when they separated alchemy from chemistry, and they threw away the al bit, and we were left with something sadly wanting. But this teaching was not entirely lost. Research into the hidden depths of the past, both literally and figuratively, show us that spiritual love was the key to these mystery teachings. They were based upon a Gnostic or more holistic way of knowing that included the objective and subjective equally. This is why the Bible refers to knowing a woman in the lovemaking sense of the word, because Gnostic knowing is all-encompassing. If you read in the Old Testament about these great family lists, these family trees, and it was about, Rebecca knowing Isaac and Jacob knowing Jezebel, and sorry, that's probably not completely accurate, but I'm just pulling this out of the air. But you will find that in the Bible, this knowing sense, it means that someone has had sex with someone. Thus, the female orgasm in its optimal holistic expression is all about the fullest flowering of that love, spiritual love and adoration of the Most High. Sacred sexuality is also about very much self-empowerment, because it brings the practitioner into a much more holistic self-awareness of who they are and their place in the world. But shamanic sexual healing is not just about the love between human partners. It is also not complete without the eternal love which exists across the dimensions between humans and the all-knowing spirits who oversee the spiritual evolution of man. As I always say, if you want eroticism, you need eros. And I explain all that in one of my recent videos, Eros, Eroticism and Beauty. But so much of this teaching has been hidden for so long, and until it is revealed and taught properly again, sex will continue to be misunderstood and channeled into the perverted, degenerate and violent practices that are destroying our human experience today and leading us all to the wasteland, whether we realize it or not. Let me be clear, paedophilia, bestiality, rape, sadomasochism, genital mutilation, and in fact any kind of sexual relations which do not honour in a loving way the inner divine being of the other, are as cruel abomination and a crime against natural law as any other. The sad truth is that the human being will continue to find the need to wage war one against the other, so long as he cannot learn to stand vulnerable on the edge of total ecstasy through a loving and trusting relationship with his beloved. In the absence of that divine initiation, man needs the thrill of extreme sports and imminent death, which itself is the experience of standing on the portal of another world, although leading to a much less fruitful initiation. To feel the utter ecstasy of divine love is an innate need in all of us, and so if the way to that state is blocked by ignorance and degeneracy, its expression will be sought by going in the other direction. In hiding this knowledge from humanity, our rulers have robbed us of our natural birthright, our stairway to the stars, and this is slowly turning the human being into a venal monster, fit only to be fooled into fighting and committing bloody atrocities against his fellow man, in endless, perpetual warfare. We have become disempowered through the inability to be in touch with our whole interdimensional selves, which are beyond just the mind and body. And this error renders us into more willing slaves who are slowly being reduced to having to rely on drugs and violence for our kicks amidst an inevitable barren wilderness of ever-increasing social ills and disease. So how can you be sure that what I'm saying is true? You will be able to independently verify, if you want to, most of the information supplied in the Sacred Sex Rites of Ishtar, because it comes from sources already published in the public domain. They just haven't been woven into this rug before. In addition, I've learned a fair amount of these mystery teachings, as they were once known, from my spirit guides. I'm what's known as a shaman, and there's more about what a shaman is in chapter 11 of the Sacred Sex Rites of Ishtar. But suffice to say, for now, shamans are among many kinds of seers and mystics who interact with the other dimensions and the spiritual entities that they meet there. These spirit guides give us various kinds of advice, information, and healing to bring back to this world, and we act as conduits for that spiritual transmission. It is a kind of specialized shamanic healing on a planetary scale. Its purpose is to ensure the continuance of the creation by an extraordinarily ecstatic act designed to manifest new worlds and new realities through an implosion of divine love. This is an occult teaching, and I hope that word doesn't bother you. The word occult doesn't mean anything evil or bad, or it's nothing to do with black magic. It's just the Latin word for hidden, occulted, the occultic mysteries of the Grail Keepers. So, after reading the Sacred Sex Rites of Ishtar, you will better understand the true allegorical, spiritual, alchemical, and sexual meanings underlying the concepts of the chalice, the Holy Grail, the cruet of Joseph of Arimathea, the creatrix, the emerald tablet, the horned god Pan, the questing beast, the Song of Solomon, the cup that overfloweth, Soma, Amrit, the ambrosia of the gods, the lily and the rose, the living waters, the land of milk and honey, the promised land, and life everlasting. It is the ultimate royal road to self-transformation, and it is so powerful it changes your life on so many levels. It is not a New Age teaching, I hasten to add. It's very old age, older than the hills in fact, which is why the first part of the book gives a little grounding in the way our early ancestors thought, which was very different and much richer and deeper than how we think today. I then describe the evidence for ancient sacred sexual practices which have been uncovered by archaeologists, bringing in the cave art, religious artifacts and sacred texts which have been unearthed by them in recent decades. I also explain a little about the rudiments of alchemy to provide a deeper understanding about how sex magic works. This is all to help you build a strong enough foundation stone to go on to benefit from the last part of the book, in which I describe the practical methods to bring this spiritual way of lovemaking into your life and into your relationships. So I hope this mystery teaching today has sown a seed with you that will eventually germinate and grow into a green and pleasant land in your own life. You've been listening to me, Annie Dieu-Le-Veut. All my books are on Amazon, and if you'd like to support my work, I'm on Patreon as Shaman of Avalon.